Hi everyone, welcome to the second series of the interview series, FinTech Making Sense of Data, where I speak with senior data leaders about the challenges that they've experienced working within the FinTech and FinServe industry around data and analytics. I'll be speaking with three guests. I'll be speaking with Jason Capehart, who's the head of data science and machine learning at Mission Lane. I'll be speaking with Deborah Lorenzen, who's previously worked at State Street as the head of enterprise data governance. And I'll also be speaking with Dalya Adams, who was previously working at Bottomline as the head of data innovation. I hope everybody enjoys the recordings and the interviews, and gets active in the comments as well. It'd be good to hear your thoughts. Cheers, everyone. So for everybody listening or watching, wherever you may be, this is Dalya Adams, ex-head of innovation, or head of data innovation, should I say, at Bottomline. And we've had a couple of chats, but there's a lot of things I want to ask Dalya, and what better place to do it than the interview series, FinTech Making Sense of Data. So welcome, Dalya. Looking forward to getting it underway. So what is it that first brought your data science and analytics skills to the world of fintech and in particular payments?
Yeah, I think the world of fintech was before payments. Payments was like a side quest, I think, as we grew. But for fintech in general, right? Like, it is an ever-changing space, and it allows you so much depth in different domains, which I think is something that when I think about the strengths and weaknesses of data teams, it all comes down to that. So if you really love real estate, there's a fintech market that supports real estate. If you really, are passionate about the healthcare sector, there is a fintech space that is helping innovate in the healthcare sector, right? So the fintech world allows you to use your powers for good, not evil, in a lot of different spaces, which I think is just really motivating, especially when we think of how much time we spend at work and how much brain power we use to solve the problems of the world around us. So and then from there, right, payments kind of flows. As soon as you dabble into your product, start touching on the financial space, you want to make life easier for your customers and streamlining their payments with a platform they understand, right? It fits, it just flows. So
yeah, absolutely. I agree that it's a similar thing that interests me about fintech is the way that it branches off into all these specialties and disciplines, and then branches off again. So yeah, totally understand the interest of getting in the space. And you were working with Bottomline, who are obviously a giant in the space, have a good portion of the market in the UK, and they're working in the US. So they're working across the world, and obviously that means working in multiple markets, but I know there's a lot of challenges that come with that. So what are some of the challenges that you faced working with data in a fintech company across multiple markets?
I think I love this question. I think there are, if I'm gonna take all of the challenges that you face in fintech, right, and just boil them down to very specific things, the first one is that you are in multiple domains, right? So like, if I use my history, I joined Nexus, which was fintech for the real estate space. That's what we were. And so we were in one domain, and that allowed us to be just exceptional in that domain. Our customers loved us, they trusted us, and the data, right? Everybody in our data world understood how our data was generated, where it was coming from, what were the weird nuances. When Nexus joined Bottomline, you enter a much larger organization that's across all these different domains. They're across real estate, they're across healthcare, they're across kind of a general small business, right? And so now the domain knowledge that you need to really understand your data is so much broader, right? And that is a much more difficult to glean that, right? As an individual who wants to do amazing things, it's so much harder to learn all of that complexity. So that one is obviously one of them. With that, right, not just the domain and how that data is generated and the nuances of it, but the regulations for those domains are different, right? So if we think of healthcare as an example, right, the privacy of an individual and their healthcare data is so important. And so you have to be super hyper aware of that, and what you're doing in one space, right? The data that you're using in one space you can't just copy paste essentially from another domain. So that's another one that that needs to be at the forefront of your mind, right? Not just moving fast and this cool thing worked over here, I want to use it over here, right? That just doesn't always work that well. And then the final one, right? You touched on it with bottom line was across multiple countries, right? So the fraud organization was based out of Israel. PTX is based out of the UK. PayModeX is based out of the United States, right? So this is a company that had its roots in all these different markets and is serving different markets across the world. And so that adds in another regulatory difference, right? Like if PTX is serving different industries, well, they're also based in, the UK. So now GDPR is at the forefront of your mind and how you're protecting this data, right? If you're, in America and where that data is originating, that matters. So it adds a whole level of complexity outside of just the accuracy on my model isn't good enough. How do I make it better? Because now you need to think the accuracy on my model isn't as good, but I can't violate a person's right to privacy, right? Like this is their data. So it is both a challenge, but an opportunity to really increase the domain knowledge of each of those spaces and kind of make yourself an asset to organizations, to people, and to your customer in the end. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like a mammoth task, and one I'm not envious of. so congrats on that one. But I suppose it prepares you, for more avenues of working in the future. You're then more experienced in several domains across the globe.
Yeah, when you're in it, like when you're in the slog, right? It's not a task that anyone wants. But the moment you get a chance to step back and look and see the amazingly clever solutions that your team and the people around you have found to solve these problems, it's just, you're proud of it, right? It was difficult. It was at times very mentally taxing, right? To think through the intricacies and connect all the dotted lines, but the end product is something that your customers trust and that you as a business are proud of, and
Yeah,
that's what we can hang our hat on the end of the day, right?
Yeah, it's very rewarding, isn't it? And I think that's one of the beauties of working in the space. And there's so much to go at and so much to keep on track of that. Sometimes organizations can try to run before they can walk in many things. We're obviously talking about getting things on the regulatory side correct and making sure everything's spot on. And I think not just fintechs, but particularly fintechs, sometimes they can be guilty of going after the shiny thing and the attractive technologies that are on the market. So when you have such a broad area to work with, and a lot of data technologies to work with, how do you sort of ensure that you're approaching scaling data capabilities in the right way and focusing on the right things?
Yeah. I don't think there's a one size fits all for everyone. But now I'm going to make an attempt. Now I'm going to jump into a one size fits all, right? We'll caveat it and then jump in.
We'll give it a go.
Yeah. If we look at Nexus, right, we were in one domain space. And even in that one domain space, a data center of excellence wasn't the be all and end all, right? We couldn't solve you needed even more domain knowledge in the marketing, in revenue, in all of these different areas. And so that's the first one that I think is super important in helping organizations kind of walk before they run, is ensuring that you are getting and building teams that have domain knowledge from a data perspective, right? The second one is, I think that it's that saying, right? When all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. right? I
Yeah.
believe really strongly in, I call them the three pillars. Maybe in the future someone will correct me and I'll add another pillar or take one away. But for me, it's always been the three pillars. There's data engineering, there's data analytics, and there's data science. If all you have is data engineering, then you're going to use data engineering to solve every problem. If all you have is data science, you're going to try and use data science to solve every problem. But I think a robust organization has all three. And when someone comes to you with an opportunity or a problem, right? So the business comes to you and says, hey, we're really trying to solve this problem. When you have all three, and all three of those capabilities are really mature and kind of in the performing phase, right? If we think of forming, storming, norming, performing, right? That kind of thing. If they're in their performing phase of team growth, then you're not using your hammer and everything's not a nail, right? You are using a specialized tool to solve the problem that group's experiencing, right? If someone comes to me and says, I don't understand this portion of my business well enough, and all I have is data science, then for sure, I'm going to try and build a model that prescribes to you the next step to take. But is that the right solution when I don't have that domain knowledge? Probably not, not me specifically, right? But me as an example, probably not, right? You want, in my opinion, to help the business grow with you, to learn and take them on kind of a analytical maturity journey. So if we're adding a third thing to this, help when they need to run, not walk, not run. Get that. Let's get that one right. It's also that it's identifying where groups and people and are in their analytical maturity journey, because we all want people to use the things that we've built, right? Like you spend
Absolutely.
so much of your time and brain power building these amazing things to solve these problems. But if you give them something that they don't trust or they don't understand, well, then everyone comes away from that unhappy, right? So if we help people grow, individuals and organizations and teams, right? Internal customers, external customers, if we help them grow with us, then we start seeing that the advances that we deliver to them, they use more, they like more, right? So
Yeah, 100%.
Those are kind of my three non-analytical centers of excellence. I think, you should have domain knowledge, right? I don't think it all just sits in one home and you work and never fully understand it. The robust three-pillar team, and then meeting people on their analytical journey.
100%. It's a careful balancing act, isn't it? Making sure that you don't want to be master of one, but not as clued up in all the other areas. And I think a lot of people will agree with you on the three pillars and how important they are. For example, I think we're all familiar with the sort of period a few years ago when everybody invested maybe a bit too much money into data science before they had solid engineering foundations, and that proved quite costly for a lot of people.
Yeah, what are we predicting on? We don't even have the data. Yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
100%.
Yeah, and brings us nicely on to the other side of things, getting things on track that we've talked about, and ignoring too much of the shiny technical stuff. But we've had a couple of chats, and we always come around to data culture being so vital for long-term success in an organization, and this is echoed by a lot of other people that I speak to. And I know that the methods change from data leader to data leader on how they aim to improve or implement a strong data culture. So what steps do you take to get to a point where the data culture is strong enough that when a business issue arises, the first or the second question people ask is, well, what does the data say? How do you get to that point?
with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. It's not, if you enter an organization that, at least from my experience, there's two, right? There's the organization that wants data to be a huge part of it, right? And then there's the organization where data is kind of a byproduct and you have to do something. The way you approach those two are so very different, right? But let's take the easy one, which is the organization wants data, right? They want data to help them solve their problems. If this is where you're at, then you've got buy-in for the most part, right? Like you've got leadership that supports the mission and is also looking for places that the data will help solve the problem, which is always really helpful. But with that, in those organizations, in my mind, it is, it's been described to me as like the Amazon tactic, the Amazon way, right? What's the hardest problem? Let's solve that first and then move on to others. So if the organization's in, right, they're bought in, then go after the biggest bang, right? What is the thing that is causing the most heartache and solve it, or try to solve it. Sometimes you got to iterate, right? Sometimes the first version, as with things data related, right, it's not as great as you want it to be, and you have to iterate and do, but go for the hard one, right? Get a win that has some magnitude. The other one, unfortunately, is the organization where you're there and they think they want to change, but you don't feel like you've got a whole lot of support around driving that change. And I think this one's slower, obviously, but it's also harder. I think at this point, it comes back to, as a leader, as a data leader, looking at where in the analytical maturity each of the groups are in, right? So is marketing further ahead than customer support? Is finance leaps and bounds ahead of operations? Or is operations forefront of, supporting and asking for data? And then you start working to solve those groups' problems, the ones that want it and are on that analytical journey, right? They're trying to be better. They want to use data because you want to show progress and you want those groups to then be champions for you, right? Because they're going to interact with another group that might not be as demanding is not the word, as interested in the tools that you have to help them solve their problems. So that's one of the ways I think in those two different scenarios, right, that you help create a cultural shift. It's either biggest bang, now everyone sees what you can do and they're beating down your door and you better hope that your prioritization structure is really set because you're going to be overwhelmed. Or it's a slow trickle of finding those groups that are dying for the help and giving them that help, even if it might not be the biggest problem. The second part of this, I think, in that shift is this is my favorite part. So I've been through organizations that have successfully transitioned, right, to a data-driven culture. And I've been with organizations that have struggled to make that transition, right, to really drive that. But one of the greatest joys in an organization that has successfully transitioned, right, that culture has shifted, is that all of a sudden you're almost crowdsourcing the next cool thing to do because you have proven that it can be done. And so now these experts in their domain, it always comes back to domain for me, apparently. These experts in their domain now look at a problem or an opportunity that they see from their 30 years of experience or 5 years of very focused experience, or 6 months of experience someplace else that they've now brought here, right? Whatever it is, wherever they are, but they see an opportunity and their mind immediately goes to, oh, how can we get data to help us solve this, right? And then now you as a data organization aren't forced to innovate on your own, right? You have other very specific partners that are giving you, you know, the greatest places to solve the problems and the most bang for your buck. And that one is, it's lovely, right? Because now you've got partners across the organization, and you really are solving the biggest problems and learning more. But you know, with a subject matter expert right there next to you. So
yeah,
um,
absolutely.
yeah.
I totally agree with you on that sense. It is a case of, you know, from the first point we were talking about, from a domains perspective, it is a case of kind of figuring out who wants it, who's open for the, you know, the change that you're looking to bring in, and who wants to look at data in a different way or a more positive light to help those guys out, and then finding your friends who can help make that happen within the organization. Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people will agree with that, and have probably done a very similar thought process in the past.
Yeah, it's a struggle though, right? It's not, when you talk about it in a setting like this, right? You make it seem, it feels so simple, right? Yeah, make friends, do cool things. But when you're in it, right, you are fighting in an organization that's not quite ready for it, right? Or hasn't fully bought in. You're struggling to get data. You're struggling to convince someone that the movement of data is worth it, right? That data is an asset, not a liability. So you're in this constant, you know, ebb and flow of, okay, I've made progress and now I'm stopped. But it's one of those, again, right? Once you are able to take a step back, then you look at, you know, you survey your land and you're like, wow, look what we were able to do. So not
Absolutely.
always simple though in the execution.
Yeah, I mean, there's people who are going to want to work with you, and then other people who, you know, be pushing against you. It's a push and pull thing. How do you sort of win that battle and bring more people over to your side, or as many as you can anyway?
Oof. Two things. Such a great question. And if I had a playbook, I'd be the most successful data person in the whole wide world, right? We'd just be out there building amazing data products. No, I think it's two things. One, and the first most important is, if your executives are not bought in, it's such a fight, right? Because you're asking for resources, and then you're asking for them to help you use data as the tool to solve the problem, right? Let's throw solutions, tech solutions at a problem, not people, right? Let's solve this way. So I think that's the first one. Like you need the buy-in of that executive level, right? To really ensure that when a problem arises, and you know, it's across the organization, if you're, you know, in a domain specific area or whatever, right? Like you need them to see the problem and go, oh, we should consult with this group, or we should be talking to these people, or right. Or if it's, you know, your chief data officer, your chief data and analytics officer, they go, oh, that's mine. Here, we can help you with that, right? You need someone there that's really, really advocating and pushing for it, right? And making sure that that data and the usage of data and the three pillars are a solution that is always on the table for a problem. Will it be the right solution for every problem? Absolutely not. That would absolutely go against my whole theory, right? But should it be looked at and be considered and weighed against other things every time? I kind of say yes. That's kind of where I find myself. But the second one is you have to meet people where they are. And I think that's a soft skill thing in a respect for the organization around you and the people around you. So if, you know, someone who believes strongly in the power of data, walk into an organization that is analytically not mature, and I don't respect that they have solved problems, right? They've solved them in the way that they could with the skills that they had. If I don't respect that, why would someone want to work with me, right? So the respect for the fact that people have solved problems before you, and they will solve problems after you, and you are a tool to help them solve that problem better, faster, stronger, more accurately, is super important. So knowing what they've tried, what went well, what went poorly, right? And at a human level, understanding their reservations and, this kind of stuff, I think is super important as well for getting an organization to change and to winning people to your side. Because, I imagine we've all been there where someone says, you're doing this. And you might do it, but are you happy about it? No. Are you gonna think warm and fuzzy thoughts about it the next time? Right? Probably not. So it's kind of like you're always in sales, you can't try and get away from it, but you're always in sales. Your job is to help people understand what you're doing and also their domain better. So
Absolutely. Yeah. It is a case of soft skills are probably one of the harder areas, I know from experience in finding really, really good data people. Soft skills can be one of the areas that people struggle in. So it is incredibly important to have that ability to speak to people at on a human level and understand that, regardless of whether you're working in data or even the fintech space, it is really just treating people like people and knowing how to get the best out of them, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think even absolutely, right? Difficult, it's a skill, right? You train for it, you learn it, you get comfortable doing it. But I think even for people that feel like their soft skills aren't great, right? Like if I'm sitting here listening to this and I'm like, oh man, they said soft skills and I just don't feel like mine are great. Empathy, right? The effort to understand who your customer is, internal or external, right? Who is the user that this is for, so that you are making better decisions at every moment that you're building a pipeline, a dashboard, a machine learning model, right? Like what's the end goal and who's the customer of this? Who am I serving, right? I think even that thought at some point, right, helps with the meeting people where they're at and giving them a data product that's helpful.
Totally. Meet people where they're at, especially because that shows you're putting some consideration into where they've been and what they've done before you got there. 100%.
Yep.
So this is we're coming close to the end now, Dalya. It's been really good having you on. Which leads me to the question that I pose in one way or another to everybody that comes on. And I know that you're not technically in the fintech space anymore, but it would be great to hear about your ideas for what you think the future of fintech looks like, and what would be some of the changes maybe that you'd like to see in the space.
Yeah, I mean, I might not be in fintech anymore, but it's always in my blood, right? It's one of those amazingly complex spaces with just a lot of opportunity to do amazing things. I think there are two things that I am looking forward to. One, kind of expectantly, and the other is like oof, I hope this happens, right? And the first one is that I think I am looking forward to whatever that next amazing breakthrough in the fintech space is, right? Like, and I think that view, that thing, comes not from one brilliant person, but from a organization that is able to crowdsource that domain knowledge, right? I think the being able to take someone's very specific knowledge of the space that they serve and then turn it into a solution is in my opinion, right, where something really, really amazing is going to come from. And I look forward to seeing how people implement that concept. The second one is in the fintech space, because of the regulations and because of how enticing in attacking fintech is from a cybersecurity perspective, right? Like the security of organizations, fintech organizations is paramount, right? This is people's very personal financial data. There is a balance that has to be had between, is data an asset or is data a liability? And if you are a CISO, right, I imagine it's always a liability, right? Data exfiltration is a problem. If you're in the data space, it's always an asset. And so one of the things that fintechs have to find a good balance on is that, right? The data is an asset versus data is a liability, and where do we draw the line between no one gets access to data versus, yeah, you have access to data and maybe the risk has gone up slightly, right? But so that one, sure, CISOs around the world will be mad about that statement, but from a data practitioner perspective, right? It's hard. It's hard to find that balance, right? Data it's liquid gold, right? The insights you can glean. And if no one can get to it, then no one can use it to make better decisions. So
100%. And I think you're right. It is liquid gold in the right hands, and hopefully there are some CISOs who see this and get angry and want want to debate about it. I think that's the idea of everything, isn't it? Really,
to find the right solution. Yep.
Absolutely, Dalya. And I want to thank you for taking part in the interview series. It's been really good to connect again. Really good to speak with you, and great hearing your insights and your experience in the space.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Ethan. Thank you for coming up with such wonderfully thoughtful questions that allow everyone in your interview series to really delve into their experiences, right, to solve the problems. You've said it a couple times, but it's all of our experiences, it's all of our differing opinions that allow us to come to the best decision as data leaders, as data practitioners. So thank you for putting this together. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Dalya, and thank you very much. I'm sure we'll speak again very soon. But for now, everyone who's listening and watching, it's been Dalya Adams. I'm joined today by Jason Capehart, the head of data science and machine learning at Mission Lane. We've spoken a couple of times, so it's nice to see you again, Jason. How are you doing?
Nice to see you too. It's a great day.
Perfect. So we've had a few conversations in the past about various things, and there's some more things that I wanted to ask you, specifically about what you're up to in the fintech space. And you've been, working with data in the fintech space for most of your career. What was it that attracted you to the industry initially?
Yeah, well, so I got in the industry initially by accident, right? It wasn't intentional. And nobody called it fintech then, nobody called it data science then. But what brought me back to fintech is really, I think, the thing that's interesting, which is, there was a time, 10 years or so ago that I was at the New York Times and looking at what was happening in San Francisco, that people had coined the term fintech, and I saw people working on a lot of the problems that made me frustrated with financial services and were the reasons that I left. Right, I saw people looking at the way that technology companies work, opportunities in machine learning and the application of data, a focus on consumers and the customer experience, and the trajectory of finding ways to think about designing products and services for customers that helped with their lives and their needs and concentrated on long relationships instead of short transactional ones. Those were the sorts of things that really got me excited to come back to fintech and come back to financial services, because I saw this, what I perceived at the time, and I think in hindsight it's been borne out, which is there's this huge opportunity in fintech for having a responsible business and a good business to be the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something that's easy to achieve for a lot of people, and it's a fine line, isn't it, for business interests, but also being responsible for your customers.
Yeah, it can be, and that's the sort of thing that I think that the best financial services companies get, right? I think that the players that I admire And the ones who do it the best are ones who really do have their customers' best interests in heart and are thinking about how both parties can be successful over time.
Absolutely, totally agree with you there, Jason. And we have a lot of people out there listening to this that probably, have some ideas of similar to what we're talking about here, and dreams of starting their own thing in the fintech space. And you're one of the founding people at Mission Lane. So what advice would you give to someone looking to start up in the fintech space, whether it's their own organization maybe, or just get into the industry? What would be some good advice from your experience?
Yeah, so I'll say that right, as much as we call it fintech, over time, I think that this customer aspect is one of the defining factors, or potentially the most defining factor about what's different about fintech companies versus legacy financial services institutions. Is that the tech is the how more than it is the what, in the sense the what is the ways in which we use technology in the same way that Google, or I'll say try to use technology in the same way that Google or Apple or Amazon or whoever your favorite successful tech company is, to meet the needs of our customers in a way that is convenient and easy for them. Technology is the way in which we do that. And so when it comes to businesses, and I think that there's been enough history here that you can see fintechs that have been successful and see fintechs that have failed. And I think that finding that product market fit and really starting with focusing on what does your customer need? What do they actually want to do, right? Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, like, what today I want to do? I want to find a 1/4 point better mortgage interest rate. Like, nobody does those things. Or like, what I want to do? I want to go and connect all my bank accounts and credit cards to this, financial services. Like, nobody does those things for fun, right? You do those things because there's something that you want in your life. You want to get a better job, or take a vacation, or be set up to buy a house, right? There's something that ultimately a customer is trying to do in their lives. And if you focus on that need that you're trying to meet for them, that's what's going to allow you to design your technology and do all the great things that we can do with data, algorithmically, with automation, to meet those needs. That's the thing that's really important. Yes, I have to say, if you're asking for advice, right, I have to say things like don't forget about unit economics. Again, right, there's enough history here that we can see there have been businesses that have done a nice job of thinking about their customer and the problems they're trying to solve, that never really figured out how to make money. And usually that's something that if you don't start out with an idea of, on a unit economic basis, does your product make money? Like, you should, that's an important one. Like, I have to say that, you need to make a sustainable business, but it's going to hang around even if customers love it. Yes, you need to think about the fact that this is a regulated industry. It's different than a lot of other types of businesses. And the way that you should think about that as a data person or technologist should be, how do I use the things that I'm good at to fulfill regulations and meet those requirements, as opposed to trying to circumvent it. But really, it all comes back to the foundation, this kernel, that if you're focusing on your customer, their needs, and the thing that they really want to get done and do, you're probably going to do a good job with it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a problem in two parts, isn't it? Using data to identify what a customer needs, but then also delivering on that is the key, and hopefully the thing that makes you money in the end and makes everything worthwhile and justifies everything you're doing. I totally agree. And one of the really cool things about fintechs that I think you were touching on as well, that differentiates them from traditional FinServ, is the accessibility to financial services, essentially, that fintechs are able to provide for people. It's a very important part of the industry. And how does data enable that? How has data become sort of the gatekeeper when we talk about inclusion of people in financial services?
Yeah, so I'll say I think that, right, when we talk about gatekeeper, I'll say what that means to me, at least. Right, the last time I saw the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, put together a study on this, they estimated something like roughly 10% of people in America were what they would call credit invisible, in the sense that they don't show their data, right? They don't have data on file with a credit bureau. and probably something another 10% of Americans on top of that, or people living in America, are what they would call unscorable, in the sense that maybe they have some data at a bureau or one of these systems that fintechs use and banks use in order to communicate about customers, but there's not enough data there to really do much of anything with. That's kind of what the unscorable means. And so you add those things together and you're saying like, well, that's close to 50 million people in the United States. If you added up all of New York City metro area, right? The whole thing, Newark, Jersey City, all of Los Angeles, all of Chicago, right? That's still not enough people, right? If you took all the people in those cities, that accounts for just how much the United States is in this like gatekeeper accessibility problem of not having access to the same sort of financial services that you and I might be accustomed to. And so I think that as much as one of the themes that we talk about in fintech is this idea of people who've been marginalized by legacy institutions, it's important not to confuse marginalized with marginal or minimal, right? This is a lot of people. This is a real problem for many people. And the way that data comes into this is right through this gatekeeping aspect of that. One of the ways in which data brokers and financial services provide value is by being a gatekeeper, by communicating about who you can trust and who knows who and what your reputation is. But right, that value they're creating is also part of the problem, which is if you're not in this system, if people won't work with you, it's difficult to get a foothold. And so what we've seen, over the course of the last 5 years in particular, is the innovations in open banking in particular, which is one of my favorite areas, and as well as in alternative data, in particular the accessibility of alternative data, and the way that bureaus and other groups have made that more common and more accessible and more understandable. It starts to create a lot of opportunities for people who, right, previously had no way to get a foothold or were in essentially a separate kind of financial system from the mainstream financial system, that at least it is easier, at least there are more routes to get into those sources now than there were a few years ago. But again, it's still the case that this is still more the domain of, I think, innovators in the space. It's still not quite mainstream, and I think until we see more success and until some of these data sources get more use and more traction and more people pick up, wait, why are some of these fintechs being so successful and growing so quickly? It's like, this is why, and other people will eventually get on that bandwagon, and then my hope is overall that gets better for a lot of those 50 million Americans we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And 50 million is a staggering number when you think about it, And I think you're right with the rise of things like open banking and new types of data that we have access to help people in that situation. Traditional FinServ and other organizations are going to have to catch up. They'll realize what not only are they missing out on, but what other, this group of people throughout the United States need, and hopefully they can meet those needs as well. So we talk about these new types or sets of data that are enabling, helping inclusion and things like that. Two things that stick out are, cash flow data and other alternative data. How has that affected, the lives of working class Americans?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, there are a few examples that I really like. One of which my favorite, and maybe this is a smaller thing, but it's so cool that I have to mention, which is some of the subscription management things, which are right. It's essentially, I would call it subscriptions can be a regressive tax, in the sense that if you are short on time, as many working class Americans are, and you are not able to spend as much time managing your finances, right, the existence of these subscriptions or things that they don't really want or don't really need become a tax on the virtue of the lack of time. And so I think open banking, and right, which is where we get cash flow data from, is a great example of a service that really benefits people who are short on time and short on income and for whom cash flow really matters. A lot of the tools around either personal finance or more towards the upper end of the financial spectrum, but still primarily focus on middle class, would be things like wealth management, right? Open banking again, and cash flow data. These are the sorts of things that, like, that's how you unlock the existence of these tools, and certainly for these tools to be better, easier to use, more direct than they were before. Even things like the entire buy now, pay later industry, that didn't exist, not all that long ago. Could some of that happen without open banking data and without cash flow data? Yeah, it could. Does it happen to the extent that it has without it? Like, no, almost certainly not. And it's same when I look at some of the opportunities in lending for lending to new immigrants, or near and dear to my heart are people who have had credit problems in the past, people who've had bankruptcies, people who've had issues with credit, or people who are new to credit, and again facing this gatekeeper problem of like, wait, I want to establish my credit history for the first time, or I want people want to rent an apartment, or I want to get a job. Like, how do I get into it? Those are the things that I see, and I'm excited about for regular Americans.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to not only the things that are right around the corner, but what the future is going to bring to use data to help people in their financial lives. And I think we've established very clearly that data is incredibly important in changing people's lives in that and their financial situations. And there's so many ways that it can affect someone. And I know that you're very busy in the space as well, Jason. So what are some of the the cool ways that Mission Lane are using data to sort of improve the lives of their customers?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, data is the heart of our business, and how we operate it and how we think about it. But to me, the thing that matters to me the most, and I think is the most impactful for the people that we work with, is around access to credit. One of my favorite stories is around a year ago, my wife was on the phone with health insurance, trying to sort out something for my daughter, and the agent that she was talking to said, who's the insurer, who's the company, who's the insurer, and my wife said, Mission Lane's the insurer for this. And the agent said, I have to stop you, I have to tell you a story, just give me 1 minute, which is when the agent had a bankruptcy. She had some problems and had to file bankruptcy, and after the bankruptcy nobody could work with her. And so she was telling my wife that she went and she was trying to get to rebuild her credit and trying to get a credit card, and nobody would approve her until she found Mission Lane. And Mission Lane was the only company that agreed to give her a credit card and getting that credit card was what allowed her and her husband to rent a car to be able to travel to see their son's graduation for college. And for me, that was the first time that I had a personal experience of running into somebody who was a Mission Lane customer who had really had a major life event impacted by the ability to get access to credit. And so for me, like, that's why we do these things. I spend a lot of time looking at data and thinking about numbers and algorithms and what do those things mean. But the reason I do those things and the reason why I think that is a meaningful and important endeavor are things like this. Most people who wind up in difficult credit situations or difficult financial situations got there out of poor circumstance, poor luck, and they need a second chance and they need to find a way to rebuild. And I think that by looking at the margins and looking for turning over stones, that we can do and be objective with data and algorithms, those are the sorts of things that can unlock this, that really can make a positive impact in people's lives who aren't being considered and I think treated the way that they could and should be.
What a brilliant story. I imagine your wife was straight on the phone to you after that call.
I did. She said I got some some hugs and kisses from my wife for that one, for doing that. It is something that whether it's I or people that you talk to or might be listening that want to do a fintech idea or want to help somebody with their financial lives, and ultimately, it takes so much time and so much effort and so many failures to get to the point where you've created something that can have a positive impact on the world. But that's the sort of thing that I look at and say, it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get there, but that's the sort of thing that makes it all worth it.
It's brilliant, and it's such a testament and justification of the work that you're doing for that, to hear that from somebody who's been affected directly by it. And what a small world as well.
Yeah, it feels like to me, we're still a small company, and so I hope to do more of that in the future.
Brilliant. Hopefully some people listening to this as well know somebody or could benefit from getting in touch and having a similar experience. It's fantastic and really encouraging to hear all the positive work that Mission Lane are doing, but also lots of other people in the fintech space as well. And I wanted to ask you, it's a question that I pose to everybody in the series in one way or another. What do you see for the future of fintech? And how do you think things can get better, and how can we help more people?
Yeah, I'll say, a couple of weeks ago, I was at a fintech conference, and which is not something I do very often. But it was funny because somehow in my mind, even though fintech's been around for a while, it's still like a dozen men and women in startup offices, workspaces in San Francisco who have this crazy idea about no, we're going to change financial services. But I stepped out on the conference floor and looked at everyone there like goodness gracious, fintech is a thing now. There are a lot of people, a lot of companies, a lot of businesses. And so for me, I'm still kind of wrapping my head around the current state of fintech as it exists today. But for me, when I think about the future of fintech, I think that we've validated a lot of the approach of fintech, things that we're talking about in terms of the focus on the customer, our technology at the heart of the business. And I think that in the future, we're probably going to only see more of that. That yes, a lot of fintech has focused on groups that have been poorly served by legacy institutions or groups that are marginalized. But I think that we're seeing more and more that this approach and this philosophy to the way in which we do business and we serve our customers is winning out. And so I think that we'll see fintechs become more popular, become more mainstream, do more of the typical financial services that we interact with every day and that are more common. my assumption is that as we come out of whatever this economic downturn is, or whatever the economists will eventually call it, that we'll probably see more consolidation. We'll see more mergers and acquisitions as fintechs that have great features, or fintechs that have, good standalone products will come together to be more robust and to serve more customers and make it more seamless for them to get their financial needs met, and have their financial needs continue to be served as they move over time. I think that that's likely what we'll see over the course of the next few years. But I have to add one more thing, which is, maybe a little self-interested, but in our world, in the data world, in the data science world, and machine learning, I really have to think that open banking data, consumer permissioned or even consumer owned data, is one of the things that we're going to see more and more of. It just makes too much sense for that not to be a future direction for all fintech and consumer lending in particular, where having the ability for consumers to own their data, potentially profit from their own data, and more than anything else, have agency and control over what is shared and what is not shared, is the thing that makes sense to me. That it's good for customers, it's good for businesses, it aligns with what I think a lot of regulators and consumer advocate groups would like to see. And that's the sort of thing that I get excited about and think about as we talk about people who are kept out of traditional financial services, that the US may take a page from developing countries and how they've used novel data sources or things like phone data and so on, to be able to get people that foothold and get them that first step into financial services. And that, right, you start to tie those things together with what we can do from an algorithmic fairness perspective to make sure that we're treating people equally and fairly, and that we can explain what we're doing from an algorithmic or model-based decision-making standpoint. And that's just a set of things that for our space and data makes so much sense to me, that within the broader picture of fintech and financial services, I think that'll continue to be an area of innovation.
Absolutely. I think you're right on the money with consumers having control and some ownership on their data. And I think the fact that we're even able to talk about people profiting off their own data is such a massive step in the right direction.
It really is, yeah.
Compared to where we've been over the last sort of 10 years. I think that's talking to you, Jason, has filled me with optimism, I'll be honest. Which is
that's the best compliment I could get.
And hopefully, I think particularly for the remainder of the year, we're going to see some of these predictions come into fruition and things to really start looking up. So it's really good to see. Jason, it's been fantastic speaking with you. I really appreciate you taking the time. Really good episode.
Same here. It's great to see you again.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the interview series, FinTech Making Sense of Data. Very happy today to introduce Deb Lorenzen, running the enterprise data at State Street, and also one of the chairs at a board of a $2.3 billion US national bank. Welcome, Deb. How are you?
I'm doing great, Ethan. Thanks for having me across. This is great.
Perfect. So we've spoke a couple of times in the past, but there's still a few questions I'm yet to ask you. So looking forward to covering those today. So starting from the top, really, what was it that brought you to the financial space working with data?
Yeah, it's been a fun journey, I have to say. I think what brought me initially was just an interest in finance. I wanted to work on Wall Street. It sounded interesting, right? And then as I worked my way through university, I started a job working for a small bank as a teller, as many people do, right? Standing and serving customers directly. And I joined that just at the time when a lot of smaller banks were consolidating. And so without intending to get involved in mergers and acquisition or anything like that, I was involved and caught up in these changes. And it turns out, even though we didn't talk about it this way back then, that all of that data movement was really about data. We just thought we were in the middle of changing from one bank to another, but it really was making sure that this customer's information made it successfully over to the whoever had bought them at the time. And then my early career was just kind of a flurry of a lot of banks consolidating. And again, all that was just about data. So without intending to, I became actively involved in data.
Excellent. I suppose it's a fairly unique avenue into data. I think a lot of people could probably empathize with the sort of falling into the data space in a natural way. So I'm often speaking to leaders in the FinServe and fintech sector, and even though the industries are very similar in some ways, there's a lot that separates them as well. How does working with data compare between the two in your experience?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity in my career to sort of see both sides of the trade in that. I've worked for large global financial institutions almost all of my career, and landed there because of all of those mergers and acquisitions that were happening. I got bought back in the day into a really large financial institution. And then in my later career, I've had this opportunity to work for a national bank in the US that's relatively small. And one of the challenges that we all have if we're working, especially on the big side of finance, is understanding our customers and being close enough to our customers. And that's the place that these new fintechs have really done a great job. A lot of fintechs are being built up around a particular community, right? So they're aiming, younger customers who want to use their phones to pay for things, or they're a group targeting a specific population, Muslim Americans in a particular city. Maybe they're getting a society together, a social group together. And they probably don't start off thinking about being banks. We have challenges, though, around the world in large populations that are underbanked, as we say, folks who don't necessarily have access to the big banks. And the big banks don't understand how to reach these customers all the time. And then the fintechs step in and understand how to reach the customers, but maybe not how to be a proper bank. So I think there's a lot of opportunity between the fintech sector and the large bank sector if we can figure out how to partner to successfully support their organizations or their groups of people.
Yeah, I think you touched into something really significant there about the main reason for the success of fintechs, if you like, which is those populations of people that traditionally weren't targeted by banks and are underbanked, and certain demographics, nationalities, and young people being one of them as well. So the need for fintechs is clear in that sense. But how does working with data specifically in these large financial organizations and the ability to reach people in society, how do they use data to reach these people and to target customers?
Yeah, so if you work in a large bank, you care about certain aspects of data, and what you really care about is managing, controlling, and protecting data, right? It's the old adage of why do people rob banks? So, well, it's because that's where the money is, right? And so as someone who works in the banking sector, we're always focused on making sure that we have safety and soundness and protecting the assets, the data, right? That's all the assets are, is data about people and about whatever assets that they control, that they manage, that are theirs, right? So we're very focused on that, and we spend a lot of time on that data. Then welcome, into the conversation, a group of people who are potentially underbanked right now, right? And then the fintech comes along, and the fintech knows through data and understands that particular customer base. And they know what matters to that customer base, and they know how to engage and how to, I would say, evaluate that customer base to determine who's creditworthy and who's not creditworthy. And they look at it through a different lens using data than maybe the bigger banks do. And they can make these better evaluations because they understand the community, right? And then the question comes is, how do we find out how to take our sort of big bank rule set about who we are and what makes us a good credit opportunity, right? And then we partner with one of these fintechs who really understands a particular community. And the data is not going to map perfectly, right? because the things that the big bank might be looking for are not necessarily the same data points that matter to a given community. So how do we map those two things together? And how do we, on the big bank side, come to understand what actually matters for this community might not be the same things that we've traditionally looked for, right? And that's where the data gets. It's all about data, right? How you're connecting these two communities together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you get that harmony between, you know, large traditional banking organizations or financial services working alongside fintechs to hopefully try and improve their offerings as well, and to tap into these other areas of community, that's when we see quite a lot of the interesting innovations happen between the two. You know, that perfect marriage of everything behind the scenes that traditional FinServe can do with the new technical advantages and innovations created with the sort of younger fintechs. I think it's really, really interesting to see on that side. So in the response to the rise of fintechs, how do you think traditional financial organizations are going to be able to use data to keep up with these smaller fintechs that are more agile and can create, you know, change very quickly? And do they even need to keep up? You know, do the fintechs, you know, are they a significant challenge to them at this point?
Yeah, in change, there's opportunity. And right now, there's a lot of change in the marketplace, or there's a lot of potential change in the marketplace, specifically for financial services. And so, of course, there's opportunity in that. I would be remiss in this conversation not to say that the big banks have a long history of using data to create underbanked communities, I'd have to say, right? We have this tradition, unfortunately, of things like redlining, where we chose places where we wouldn't loan money to. And we limited it, we simply wouldn't loan money to a particular neighborhood, right? If you lived in that neighborhood, you were redlined, meaning you didn't have the opportunity to access that. We have made rules that have intentionally, and I will say intentionally excluded certain parts of the population. So we have a lot that we need to answer for in the big bank community. And the great thing is that the fintechs are now responding to that, understanding that these populations also need to be supported. So it's quite easy for the big banks to come into these conversations with fintech with all the data and all the understanding we have and sort of try to act like we know everything. And these fintechs don't necessarily. To take advantage of these opportunities and to serve this customer base, the big banks are going to have to stop and think for a minute and change their rules. And if they don't, and that's okay, then the fintechs are going to partner, they're going to learn how to become banks, and that's when the big banks are going to get disintermediated, meaning, you know, that customer base is not going to end up. Right now, largely, these fintechs don't necessarily have, they're not necessarily banks. They're not necessarily, you know, with the banking license and all the rest of it, and understanding how the regulators work and following all the regulations, right? So they still, if they want to serve their customers with financial service products, they still need to partner with someone who's on the larger side. That won't be the case forever, right? So into the breach here, in this short period of time, where the fintechs haven't become banks necessarily yet, and still need a partnership, either the larger banks are going to figure out how to change their rules, how to peel off some of the history and the legacy of only doing business in a certain particular way, only doing business if these data points are accessible and meet the test that we're accustomed to, right? If we don't, then these fintechs are going to figure out how to become banks themselves, and it's going to change the game completely. And we see that to start happening with some of the more recognizable names, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just touching on that, do you think that would be the that's what causes the shift? You know, the the groups of society that, as you mentioned, have been redlined previously, that fintechs are happy to work with and happy to offer their services to. Do you think, I imagine that's a huge portion of the population in many cases. Do you think that's how fintechs will, become more established, and gain those licenses to operate in a similar way that big banks? Is it going to be working with the traditionally redline groups that almost flips the switch?
It's either the sort of the egregious examples of redlining, or if you think about all of the regular services that people need to live their daily lives. And one of the big services that happens in the world right now, and has for many, many years, is repatriation of funds. That's a good example, right? Someone emigrates from one place to another place. They get a good job and they're sending money home. That's a pretty normal pattern. There are huge populations that emigrate just for that purpose, so that they can send money home. Most larger financial institutions won't support those payments these days. So folks in those populations have been relegated to using less confident means to send money home, right? Either, the old, wire transfers at a sort of box on the corner where you hand your cash to the guy and he would promise that he would, wire it back. And then on the other end, there was also, a guy who got that money and took it out to the family, right? There's a lot of leakage in that for the people who are actually just trying to send money home, and not as much security as you want. So a fintech can step in and provide more security and safety, where maybe that money can go straight from your phone to the phone of your mom or your family, back home. That feels a lot better for you as an individual, right? And how can the banking environment support that in a way that helps folks being able to send that money from phone to phone, without by using data in some way? And I think there's opportunity there. I'm not necessarily sure the big banks are paying attention to that.
Yeah. I agree with you there, and it's also tapping in again to the speed and accessibility of fintechs and what they can offer, because going to the guys you mentioned on the corner and sending money across the world wasn't an immediate thing. But nowadays, with things like I know people who go on holiday from the UK to parts of Europe, we use things like Monzo, where you can use your the bank card and not have to pay a charge for exchanging the currency. So there's a lot of quick alterations that fintechs have been able to make for accessibility, for not just those smaller sections of society that were redlined, or people that work in a certain capacity, but also the wider population as well.
Yeah, and in that, you raise a great point, Ethan. In that, some products are going to disappear, and there's lots of times if you start a company, it doesn't matter if you're a bank or anything else, if you start a company, you get used to this product. So there's a product that you probably never touched or put your hands on, but I did: traveler's checks, right? When I first started traveling, that was how you brought money. You brought US dollar denominated traveler's checks if you went to Europe. And when you went to pay for your hotel in Italy, you pulled out one of your US dollar traveler's checks, right? And the amount of people and time and effort that went into trying to make sure that was a real traveler's check, and that you didn't come with a fake one, and that you got your money, and the extra time, where today, as you say, you can use one of these fintech services. Someone somewhere is still paying some amount of foreign exchange, but the amount or the percentage of foreign exchange, fees that you're paying leakage is substantially different than the amount of fees, leakage, and cost that I went through to get some traveler's checks at home, and then have them converted into Italian lira at that time, right? A currency which no longer exists even, right? But these the opportunities and the security for individuals who are trying to do normal things, right? To pay for your coffee in Poland, right? When you're traveling, the amount of security and safety and comfort you have when you take advantage of these fintechs is so much better than what the traditional banks necessarily could even offer, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to that point that they probably are going to have to offer similar services or keep up in some way, because I know people from sort of my generation and younger are far more interested with the quick service that they can use on the phone, and the sort of catchy taglines, and it's a very different world for fintech compared to traditional finserv, in not just what they offer but their appearance in the market as well. So I think that should come into play too. So we often see news about fintechs running into trouble when the economy isn't at its best, which has happened fairly recently as well, in the last 6 months, and with waves of startups sometimes having to shut up shop, which is a shame. But it's something that's a lot rarer for larger and more established financial organizations. So when we look at the next, let's say, 10 years for fintech, what role do you think data will play in ensuring that they can continue to grow in the market and retain their place and even overtake traditional finserv?
Yeah, so there are a whole bunch of things to unpack in that, right? Maybe the first place is to say that in the startup world, whether it's fintechs or any other product set, there is going to be a fair bit of churn, right? People come to market with a product and say, this is the best thing that's ever been invented. And it turns out actually someone else already invented it and did it better, right? So there's always going to be a fair bit of churn. You don't see that churn in the same way when it's happening at the larger banks, but it happens at the larger banks all the time. They're always coming up with ideas internal to the bank, right? You kind of think of an umbrella with a whole bunch of products underneath it. There's always new ideas in there. And lots of them don't make it very far, but you don't see it because it's not the company going down, right? So there's some amount of churn on the fintech side that one would take as normal and natural, right? Or someone comes up with a great idea, but then their IT side isn't as strong as it needs to be, so someone else takes that same idea and capitalizes on it in a little bit better way. You also have to remember that most of the big banks are, 200 years old, 300 years old, right? They've been through a lot and they understand a little bit how to weather the storm. We're in a period right now since 2008 that has consistently since 2008 been tough for the big firms. And I think, and I'm old enough to remember a time before this, it's not always been like this. It's not always been this kind of, a little bit locked down in terms of what new market segments or new customers were willing to go after. Credit quality hasn't been required to be so high as it's had to be since 2008. And that excludes a lot of people from the market, right? And it's that exclusion of people that's lasted for so long. You can't get a loan to buy a house unless your credit is absolutely perfect and you've got half the money for the house sitting in your savings account. Who's got that, right? So it's partly the big banks' fault for not serving customers that's allowing all of these opportunities to come up for the fintechs. Just like your example, you want to travel to Europe and you don't want to pay half of the amount of your savings in fees to a big bank just to be able to successfully get a hotel and get breakfast in the morning while you're there. So while the big banks have kept credit so tight and in the last number of years, and it's been a long time now, right? Since 2008, that's what's creating some of these opportunities. So how can we work together to improve the service using data to a broader population, right? And I know I talk about this in terms of products and customers, but it is all about the data that's involved in, that we need to create these products. It's about the data that we need about the customers to understand exactly who they are and how we can best serve them. So how can we work together? I think that there are still good opportunities for the FinServe community to partner with these great ideas on the fintech side. Again, they're not all going to be either the best idea and they're not all going to be the best technology, right? So as a FinServe person, you have to be thoughtful and evaluate these opportunities as they come along. But if we want to serve a broader market than just the handful of people who have perfect credit today, right? If we want to serve that broader market, we need to tap into these great ideas that are coming up on the fintech side and figure out ways that we on the FinServe side, who understand the rules and the regulations, and we understand how to protect money from the bad guys, we understand how to keep your data safe, we can partner with the people who understand specific communities and who know how to reach those communities and evaluate those communities. And I think that's a win for everyone.
It does certainly sound like that, doesn't it? Like a match made in heaven. Fintechs can focus on the things they've done really well in the sort of last 10 years, sometimes even further back than that, when we look at some of the originators like PayPal. So those guys do their jobs so well. If they could take advantage of all the regulation and licenses that FinServe have, it sounds like it should be a match made in heaven. So hopefully we see that a lot more often.
Yeah, I think there are folks out there trying to do that. We just need to continue the focus in that area.
Absolutely. And I think regardless, fintech are going to continue to grow and to probably, I say dominate the market is a bit too early to say, but definitely move, cover more ground in that area. I definitely think so.
Yeah, I mean, if I look backwards in time, I was a relatively young person working on Wall Street, and someone said to me, like in a hallway conversation, hey, there's this new bookstore online and it seems like it's got legs, and you should probably put some money in that one, buy some stock in this little company. And I was like, oh, that seems interesting. What's the company? Well, it's Amazon. Like that. There's an Amazon in this new set of fintechs that's being created today, right? We just don't know which one. There were thousands of other ones at the same time that Amazon came up, right? Who didn't turn out to be successful in the long run. And it comes down, it's important for the FinServe community to be able to look and honestly analyze what opportunities these things are, and then take advantage of them, right? Work with them, try to support them, fund them, connect with them, partner with them, so that, both we can continue to take care of the financial markets, because it's important for all of us that the financial markets continue to function, and also be able to extend to a larger set of the population.
100%. I completely agree. And it's been really interesting hearing from you, Deb, particularly because of your background in FinServe, but also the extent of your knowledge within fintech as well. It's been great to have somebody who has terrific knowledge on both sides. So I really appreciate your time in answering my questions and chatting to me. Thank you very much. Everyone, that was Deb Lorenzen, and it was really nice catching up with you, and look forward to our next conversation.
Same. Thanks, Ethan.